Naturally, a film, TV show or video game is a representation of the world we know. Sometimes this can be a realistic representation, but other times it could be completely off the wall. Despite a lot of media taking place in a fictional world, you will often find that most follow similar rules and restrictions to the real world. One of the main ways fictional worlds are restricted is they often focus around human beings as we know them. This means that naturally, regardless of how fictional the world they are in may be, the characters still represent something that we can see reflected in the real world. But what areas are most affected by this? Well, I'm glad you asked. Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk theory. As I've mentioned, media is a representation of the world around us. Therefore, it is something you have to consider when writing your script. Representation is one of these areas that can sometimes be really crucial to your story, but other times can often be overlooked. Sometimes representation makes your story more compelling, and other times it can be your piece's downfall. You don't always have to put purposeful representation in your piece, but it is important to understand it and your audience to make sure you don't accidentally misrepresent anyone or anything. To help understand your audience better, I highly recommend you watch my video on audience theory, which I'll put in the little eye in the corner. It will just help to break down the mindset of most audiences and allow you to look at some of these subjects through their eyes. Now, representation literally covers everything, so there is no way I'm going to be able to cover all of it in one video. But if I remember correctly from my studies, there are three main areas of representation you need to be aware of, and that is gender, ethnicity, and age. There are also two ways you can portray representation in media. The first is through the piece's construction. How does the camera angles, editing, and sound come together to portray the characters and events? But rather than explain that here, I highly recommend you go and watch my previous video on camera angles, which explains all their uses for representation and other useful effects it can have. The second way to represent something is through the scripting and character development, which would often be argued to be the most important, as regardless of your camera angles, if you say the character is a manly man type of character, that is how he's going to appear. This is often what makes people decide whether the representation is positive or negative. But what do I mean when I say a representation can be positive or negative? Well, to be honest, a good representation of something is simply something that shows a close recreation of reality. Versatile characters with multiple layers and depth to them. I know this seems vague, so an easier way to explain it is to simply look at what a negative representation is, and most of the time, this comes down to stereotypes. Stereotypes are simplified representations of a person, groups of people, or place through basic or obvious characteristics, which are often exaggerated. They are used to describe characters quickly, relying on existing audience recognition. This is where the part about misrepresentation comes in. Stereotypes are often founded on some level of observational truth, however, things become exaggerated and outdated over time, which can lead to people becoming offended, as they do not represent the whole group very well. So to start with, gender, and by association, sexuality. What are the stereotypes for that? Let's begin with men. Men are stereotypically portrayed as manly men. I just realised how unhelpful that sounds. Let's use the word macho instead. So, men will be presented as tough, muscular, and hard, you know, your Bruce Willis or Daniel Craig types. Despite this being a stereotype, this is one of the few that doesn't usually have a negative backlash. It might if the character is strong but dumb, however, on the whole, most heroes take the form of these strong male stereotypes, and most men don't mind it. They like the fact their gender is being shown as tough and heroic. Now on the flip side, if you go for the homosexual man, they are stereotypically portrayed as overly feminine and flamboyant, which is often considered offensive and regressive. People that consider themselves homosexuals are still people. They act in a variety of ways depending on their upbringing and environment, as any straight person would. They do not all act in a camp and flamboyant manner. Yes, some will, but you often find when these stereotypes are used, it is for comedic effect, and the jokes will often be at the expense of the homosexual character, and that is where the problem lies. Now for women, we basically see the male stereotype reversed. They are stereotypically viewed as beautiful, fragile, overly emotional, and either in need of saving or as an assistant to the hero. I don't think I need to explain why this is often a problem. This is a very old-fashioned view of women in general, the damsel in distress. Look at an old Disney film like Cinderella, you'll see what I mean. She wishes to find love, beauty, and wealth, but is incapable of doing it without the prince. Even the mice in this story are more active than she is. So, obviously, this is something we don't see as much, well, at least not to that extreme. I mean, look at Alien. Sigourney Weaver is the only character to survive. She is a badass, kicking alien butt and surviving another 2 films. However, we still have elements of the old stereotype creeping through. Despite her heroic and powerful nature, we are still given a scene where she undresses, which subconsciously puts her into a sexualized position for the male audience, going back to the old view that women are meant to be seen and not heard. And that wouldn't be the last time either. We are getting a lot more strong female characters like Rey from Star Wars, Katniss from the Hunger Games, Hermione from Harry Potter. But Hollywood is still holding on to these old ideals in a lot of ways. Katniss still has to have a love interest, as does Hermione. Rey is the only one who doesn't and actually saves herself in the end, but she is an outlier in all of this. I know there is a lot more I could say about these issues, sexuality and gender being on a spectrum and all that, but as I said, today I am just laying down the basics you need to know about representation. So next, we're going to move on to ethnicity. Now, ethnicity is a huge subject. With so many races across the globe, it becomes impossible to list them all. So we are going to look at some of the big stereotypes: African Americans, Latina, Asian, British, and American. Yes, I know, there are so many more, but as I say, I don't have time to physically go through them all, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with the stereotypes from other areas. So, African Americans. This stereotype has changed drastically through the years, but one of the most recent ones is referred to as the ghetto stereotype. Those African Americans that are gangsters, drug dealers, wife beaters, I'm sure you're familiar with it. It shows them as thugs, vandals, and generally untrustworthy individuals, which obviously isn't great. The easiest way I can go around explaining the Latina stereotype is just to show you this clip from Modern Family.
Exactly, that's why I didn't tell you. Now the dog is happy, Manny can sleep, and we have pickles.
Okay, it worked out this time. But don't forget that stealing is against the law. Now maybe in Colombia.
Here we go, because in Colombia we trip over goats and we kill people in the street. Do you know how offensive that is? Like we're Peruvians.
The character of Gloria has brought around a lot of controversy. She speaks English poorly, jokes about being a gold digger, constantly references crime and drugs in Colombia, and is always dressed as if she's going out to a club. That pretty much covers that. To say someone is Asian is a huge generalization anyway, but the main 3 are those of Arabic origins, Eastern Asian origins, and Indian origins. The basic stereotypes for these 3 are: Arabic or Muslims are seen as terrorist threats, Eastern Asians are math nerds or kung fu masters, and Indians, well, normally these people are shown to have thick accents, turbans, and other traditional garbs, and they're obsessed with their home culture, like in these films. The final 2 aren't always referred to in exams, but as a Brit, I find it quite interesting, which is why we're going to be looking at British and American stereotypes. The British are typically arrogant, posh, buck-toothed tea drinkers that love the Queen, whereas Americans are shown as hillbillies, over-religious, overweight, and funnily enough, arrogant. So I suppose there are some similarities between us after all. Now, as I've said, these are stereotypes, not my view on race. And you need to know that these stereotypes are dangerous. It's one thing for Kevin Hart to say something about him being black, and often they are used as comedic tools for such films. But there is a fine line, and racial stereotypes are the most dangerous. If you misrepresent someone or a group, it can kill your entire production. So please, take care if you're going to use them. Finally, we get onto age. Don't worry, age is only a short and simple one. Basically, you're looking at OAPs and teenagers or young people. Young people. Now I sound old. So, OAPs, or old people, are often portrayed as grumpy, outdated, slow, weak, whiny, unable to use technology, unhealthy, miserable, hard of hearing, and of course, always talking about the war. Some of these factors are based on truth and are often used as more comedic elements, particularly things like the inability to use technology and their hard of hearing. Whereas young people, on the other hand, are often shown to be immature, stupid, greedy, lazy, selfish, violent, callous, gullible, unreliable, careless, self-entitled, and never going to achieve anything. Now, these stereotypes do come out in comedic ways. I mean, just take a look at the in-betweeners, crude, immature, stupid teenagers obsessed with sex, and it plays off as quite a funny show to watch. But then there's also the negative side of it, the hooded youths of today, Those that are violent vandals that will break into shops, steal bags and graffiti on walls. These are the things that are often portrayed in the news, and it's often why young people are given such a bad reputation with the older generation, making them afraid of what they might do next, and making it so there's more discipline in schools, harsher juvenile centres, even though, actually, this only shows a minority of young people. And that's the basics. Those are some of the most common stereotypes you will encounter in films, TV shows, and video games. Now, the big point I want to make is that these stereotypes are representations of people and people groups, but they are not accurate. The thing to do nowadays is to take these stereotypes and turn them on their head. Examples of this would be Nick Jonas's character in Kingdom or Cal Penn's character in Designated Survivor. Jonas plays Nate, an up-and-coming fighter who is strong, powerful, and shows all the signs of masculinity, but he is actually a closet homosexual, which completely destroys the stereotype of homosexuals. Similarly, Penn's character is a White House secretary and shows no sign of being stereotypically Indian as a character. These flipped stereotypes help give the characters some depth and make them more believable as human beings for serious dramas, rather than a quick punchline. My piece of advice for this episode: look at your story idea, look at the characters involved. Are they just falling into stereotypes without you realising? Think about what drives them. How can you make them different from the stereotypes we've discussed today? Or is the stereotype essential for the character's story arc? Are they going to grow out of it? Or is it essential for a gag? If so, then make sure you're doing it tastefully. Remember, stereotypes can be useful to get a character's personality across quickly, and you can get some laughs out of it. But you need to be careful and try your best to make it so people won't be offended. You can't please everyone, and sometimes these things are necessary, particularly for certain story arcs or historical events. But it's worth having a think and considering your alternatives. And don't forget, what you present on screen is powerful. It will be how some people get their information, and so they'll take fictional stereotypes as fact, so just be careful. If you thought this was helpful, give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to talking theory with you again very soon. Ta-ta for now!